All right, welcome back. Salute. It's going to be a part 2 to the previous tape we made when we were dealing with some of the Crypto-Saturnians and how these people have infiltrated various religious groups and various public and private organizations for the past, few hundred years, and how they have used these religious groups and organizations as a public charade or almost like a cloaking device. So the average person out here doesn't know what their true intent is. So you have a lot of people that may even be around you, that may be part of your so-called friends and family groups, or maybe just certain, areas and environments that you've associated with other people. When we're in grocery stores, etc., a lot of us are around people in our personal lives that have dual agendas, So when we hear these terms like secret societies or, like I say, certain private clubs and things like that, you just got to understand that there are people who have consolidated power and they are working with each other. And their objective may benefit them, but it doesn't benefit the greater society or the greater global community of people. All right. And these types of mindsets and, people who have moved this way and operated this way has been here since the beginning of time. So that's what the previous tape was dealing with as far as, some of the origin of the magical, we can call quote unquote black magic systems we live in right now, especially in 2021. In this age of quote unquote wokeism, everybody is meditating. Everybody is trying to quote unquote open their third eye. Everybody's trying to quote unquote raise their kundalini. Everybody's trying to quote unquote ascend to their higher self. And although a lot of these terms, have a esoteric and occult meaning, they have been abused severely, I would say, especially in, let's say, the last, it's 21 now, let's say in the last 10 years, 5 years, 8 years, when this quote unquote illuminated conscious movement was slowly about to reemerge, a lot of us didn't know it was really paganism. A lot of us didn't know it was pantheism and polytheism. A lot of us didn't know it was goddess worship and fertility worshiping groups and cults. And a lot of us didn't know that these were sex cults as well. So the, understanding of the left hand and the right hand path of the soul, it has been, that knowledge has been spread out amongst every continent and culture. That's why a lot of the stories and mythology somewhat seem the same. But I can honestly say in this, United States that we live in, modern day Babylon or Rome, we're dealing with more of a pagan society over here that I see, especially in the so-called black community. But anyway, what we're going to do in this tape is just conclude with some of the points that I introduced in the last one, so we could put a good bow on this tape and end our understanding of this topic, or at least for this chapter or this section of it. So in the previous tape, I talked about the Sabbatai and Frankist Luciferians and how these people converted into various public organizations and religions, such as Islam, Christianity, and some of them may even be publicly, quote unquote, Buddhist or Judaic. So the term Sabbatai comes from a man named Sabbatai Zevi, who was born in the year, I think, 1626. And he was from Smyrna, Turkey. OK. And long story short, this man proclaimed himself to be the Messiah. So he was a false Messiah. And his messianic age was supposed to start in the year of 1666. And I'm pretty sure that him and his, apostle by the name of Nathan of Gaza, they chose to use that number of 666 because behind closed doors, these guys were Satanic Kabbalists. When I say a Kabbalist, I mean somebody who is probably traditionally Jewish in their religion, but they have infused certain Babylonian magical themes into the religion. All right. So when we get into a lot of the Saturnian worship, that's Kabbalah, and a lot of other things, including resurrection and more so reincarnation as well, because that's another theme that certain Kabbalists use. Whereas when you look into the Quran and scripture, that is not necessarily consistent. So we have a lot of people out here in, certain schools of thought, and they may be out here spreading the idea that John the Baptist could be Elijah reincarnated, or some of the other prophets in the New Testament may be some of the reincarnated prophets of the Old Testament. Me personally, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think that the Most High Power, when we were all brought forth from the ocean of mercy, which is what our individual soul came from, we were all given our own individual soul, our own individual monad, or own individual spiritual identity. And through that individuality, we were supposed to come in harmony with the rest of creation. And of course, the higher power that we all came from. So we don't have to necessarily, have the same soul reincarnating over and over and over, taking the form of different personalities. Whereas these could just be different souls. And some of these souls may have had some of the, same intentions and objectives. So when you look at people like Saddam Hussein, for example, Saddam Hussein thought that he was a reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. And he thought that, he was revitalizing the Babylonian Empire via Iraq. So a lot of the, quote unquote 9/11 terrorism and that quote unquote war on terrorism with Iraq and Afghanistan that's still going on today. A lot of the United States Kabbalistic military magicians, sorcerers, they wanted to go over to the so-called Middle East into Iraq and see what other type of Babylonian information that Saddam Hussein may have had access to. So that was a lot of the, behind the scenes Freemasonic agenda behind, the public quote unquote war on terrorism. So you all just also keep your eye open for a lot of the conflicts between modern day quote unquote Israel or the Zionist state of Israel and the Palestinians, because a lot of that is part of these just messianic events and quote unquote apocalyptic events that are happening as of today. So that guy Sabbatai Zevi, he was one of the men in the early 1600s to bring about this false messianic age. And when he was put under the pressure, he actually dropped his whole I'm the Messiah thing when the Moorish sultans and other officials put his feet to the fire. And they pretty much told him that if you are the Messiah, you will survive if we torture and kill you. But if you're not, we're going to kill you. So in order to, survive, you're going to have to convert into Islam, because some of the various Shemitic Ishmaelites, they were very aggressive and they would force Islam on people. So I have to also say this, too. A lot of the Ottoman Empire or the Osman Ali Empire or the quote unquote Turkish Caliphate, the original one, these people were a little abusive and abrasive. OK, a lot of them that were practicing Islam, or they were a lot of the citizens of these, Islamic empires or Islamic kingdoms of the Ottoman Empire. It included Christians, Muslims, and so-called Jewish people. But nevertheless, when the Islamic expansion took place, I would say from, about 600 AD all up until, really about World War I, the Islamic expansion into Asia Minor, to the Far East, to Europa, Northwest Africa, America. Some of these Ishmaelites and some of these Israelites who had converted into Islam, they were very aggressive and they would force Islam on people. So that's what happened to that guy, Sabbatai Zevi. So when he converted into Islam, he still was practicing Kabbalistic, satanic customs behind closed doors. So you start to have this concept or this practice of publicly looking like I'm practicing one religion, but behind the closed doors, I'm practicing another one. All right. So the other man we want to talk about real quick is Jacob Frank. He was born in Poland. And he lived about, I would say about 100 years after Sabbatai Zevi. And Jacob Frank basically thought that he was the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi. So he was continuing these Kabbalistic thought processes. And he went on his, own crusades to get people to get down with his idea. And he started to get a lot of followers as well. And, as I introduced also in the previous tape, that a lot of the men and powerful banksters, financiers, and people of power that he got to get into his group that we know today as the quote unquote Illuminati. But originally, a lot of the people that he got to, get in his group through campaigns, these deals, these contracts were sealed through wife swapping and through letting your daughters sleep with these other prominent men that you're trying to get in league with. OK, now, I'm not necessarily saying that Donald Trump is doing this with his daughter and that guy Kushner that she's married to, but that's somewhat of an example of it. So you have to understand that in the higher Freemasonic world, the higher super secret society world, the contracts and the deals aren't necessarily always sealed with just you signing a piece of paper. sometimes they're sealed with you having to do things a little deeper than that. So you'll have to commit some type of a sacrifice to show your loyalty and allegiance to the group. Whether that sacrifice may be you committing, let's say, a murder and getting someone killed. Whether that sacrifice may be you giving up a female family member, whether that be a wife or daughter, for the other secret society members to engage in sexual activity with her, or whether that may be some type of homosexual pact or blood pact, blood ritual, animal sacrifice ritual, or even bestiality ritual that the person partakes in with these other secret society members. And all of this, acts as a contract for them to do the bidding of Lucifer behind closed doors, because the Sabbatai Frankists did not worship the Most High God. They actually worshiped Lucifer. They knew that there was a Most High God or a higher power of creation, but they didn't necessarily get in league with that. They got in league with some of the different adversarial jinn who decided to go against the plan of the direction of Earth. Okay, we'll say that. So these people, today who are behind closed doors doing a lot of black magic and some of this other satanic stuff, they are in league with, let's say, certain evil or wicked adversarial spiritual forces and energies. Okay. So when we say that they're doing a ritual or trying to, get in contact with quote unquote Satan, don't necessarily take that as literal, because a lot of these spiritual interactions that they get with these demonic energies, they come through the ears, they come through the eyes, and they come through other senses that the human being has access to. And these jinn inspire through that. So, if you are familiar with going into states of contemplation, which is what Islam ultimately is, or what they call Sufism. Sufism is ultimately the realities of the soul. OK, because also to salute to the person in the prior tape that wanted me to, I guess, hit back on the flat earth topic and was kind of wondering, wanted a little more information on that. Because some of us may wonder, is the earth flat? Is it round? What are we dealing with? What I want to really say on that is we want to deal with basically understanding that the reality of the soul is accessed through contemplation. So there are different dimensions and different layers of this earth, but you cannot necessarily physically get there, or at least I don't think you can. Yes, they do say things like there's an ice wall and all that other information, but I'm not going to sit here and act like I know all that, or even sit here and act like I maybe even agree with all that. But what I can tell you is that the soul, when you go into a state of contemplation, or what we call quote unquote meditation, when you silence your ego, you silence those demonic whispers in your head. So you know how sometimes you get ready to meditate and all of a sudden you get these whispers in your mind, and a lot of them may be negative, trying to distract you from meditation, trying to distract you from getting access to these realities of the soul. In Islam, these are known as the waswas, or the different satanic whispers and the different satanic influential directions given by these evil jinn. Okay, so you have to understand that we are in the third dimension here, and everything in the third dimension is going to come in some type of a shape, some type of a form, or some type of an image. So everything here is in an image or a form. And within these images and forms is some type of an energy or some type of a spirit that is animating that, whether it be an animal, whether that be a tree, a bush, a bumblebee, or even a human being. All of us are basically images and forms, but deep within us and deep inside this image or form is the true us, the real us, the energetic us, or the spiritual us, or the soul us. So we don't want to get caught up in these different illusions of this physical world, because they can all change. So as far as, the whole flat earth thing, if you want deeper information on that, you just need to understand, that we are in the third dimension, which deals with height, width, and depth. So we want to understand the depth of the third dimension. There's no point of trying to figure out if there's some other dimension of earth to go to when we haven't even really accomplished and achieved everything that we can in this third dimension. Most of us don't even understand the depth of our own personal lives. We don't even really understand why certain things have happened to us, why our environment may be a certain way, etc. So, to kind of move forward from that point, The reality of the soul is what we want to really be focused on. You know, if you into the flat earth thing, that's cool, but I don't really put too much energy into that. The reality of the soul and you experiencing whatever you can experience through that contemplation and whatever other spiritual realities that are opened up to you through you doing that. I'm a little more into that. And also this is recorded in the Isra Miraj, or the heavenly ascension of the Prophet Muhammad. So for the brother, you know, out there who asked me about the flat earth thing, you know, if you want some more information on that, go and research the Prophet Muhammad and the Isra Miraj. Also, too, the Prophet Jacob or Israel, he went through a mirage as well. So he experienced Isra Miraj, and it's known as Jacob's ladder. So you had a variety of prophets who were accessing these various realities of the soul. And they weren't necessarily going to different physical planets or earths or stars. So you have the Prophet Muhammad, who went through the various layers of the heavens, and he came into contact with the other prophets. So you have the Prophet Muhammad, who taught us about these realities of the soul. Of course, Yahushua or Yahushua, he talks about these various realities of the soul. He talks about that the kingdom of earth or the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and it is here, because he's talking about letting the Most High see through your eyes, letting the Most High hear through your ears, letting the Most High smell through your nose. So a lot of that is you basically getting rid of your ego and letting the higher self take over and guide and instruct you. Okay, that's what a lot of that is dealing with. What point do I want to go to next? Oh, yeah. So we talked about, you know, the Prophet Muhammad and his Isra Miraj. We talked about the Prophet Jacob or Israel and his Isra Miraj. And also the Prophet Enoch, when Enoch had his Isra Miraj in the book of Enoch, when he was taken up into the various levels of the heavens. So all these prophets had their own Isra Miraj. And when we talk about Sufism, we're talking about contemplation and you experiencing these different realities of the soul. And that's what a lot of these prophets, sheikhs, rabbis were trying to teach in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. All right. And this is something we all could do. We all could do this. We all have a soul, and we all can experience these realities of the soul. All right. So we want to, you know, we want to deal with that. We want to experience our own Isra Miraj. OK, that's what that's about. So moving forward, the next thing I want to talk about is the satanic fathers of these revolutionary movements, because I kind of tapped into that a little bit in the previous tape. When I say revolutionary movements, what do I mean by that? Movements or different revolutionary activities that seem to be helping the greater society, but they are not. A lot of these movements are instituted and orchestrated by Luciferian Kabbalists behind closed doors, but in the public, they are acting as if they are part of other things. So let's look at some examples of these quote unquote revolutionary movements that these satanic Luciferians had their hands in. So the French Revolution, American Revolution, feminism or the women's rights liberation, communism/socialism, globalism or international communities, liberalism, wokeism. These are various revolutionary movements. Now, one that I want to, stick with right now, we're going to talk about this woke movement. This is a Luciferian movement. Now, I know that sounds very confusing because you're thinking to yourself, well, how could that be a Luciferian movement? Because this whole wokeism, believe it or not, is getting you to go away from the reality of the soul. And what it's doing is getting you a little too much caught up in the physical earth, in these different physical human activities. You see, a lot of the wokeism also is telling you that you can become illuminated through your ego. Yes, most of what you're seeing in the so-called black community and these people that are calling themselves, spiritual and things of this nature, they really are just exalting the ego. All right. And that's very, very dangerous. A lot of the other fake wokeism that's going on that these Saturnian, satanic Luciferians behind closed doors have created is the fake, quote unquote, black history wokeism by giving you all this information about being from Africa, being about, being from Egypt. A lot of those Pan-African movements that were in the 80s and early 90s, those were set up by Luciferians. It's the fake right, go left move all over again, you know? So a lot of what I'm seeing people in these last few years that are calling themselves quote unquote woke, they actually believe a lot of things that aren't true. They don't really know their true heritage and culture, where they come from. And their lives don't seem to be going in the right direction. And it also seems that they're motivated by the slaying of the degenerate people in the so-called black community by these race soldiers out here, aka quote unquote police. When I looked into some now let me say this. I don't think that anybody out here that deserves to be abused or quote unquote killed by the police, you know, whether you so-called black or so-called white. But when I looked into George Floyd, when I looked into Breonna Taylor and some of these other people that these movements have been created around, and these people's personal lives, and also too, I'm not saying that these people are perfect or they had to be, but it just seems like in these people's personal lives, they were not these quote unquote Malcolm X, quote unquote Rosa Parks figures like we think they were. You know, George Floyd had a lot of other things going on that had nothing to do with getting his higher self. And so did Breonna Taylor. You know, Breonna Taylor, she basically should be on that new BET show when they talk about real trap queens and stuff like that. They might as well make a Breonna Taylor episode, because when I was looking into some of the shit with her, it was like she was, you know what I'm saying? She was Griselda Blanco or something. Like she was like the, you know, the Peruvian cocaine queen from what I was seeing. Now, I mean, that could have been false. I don't know who she was personally, but it just, you know, she wasn't this Rosa Parks figure like they trying to make her be. So you got to watch out for a lot of that woke stuff. They put false prophets and false leaders in front of you for you to kind of rally around. And that's dangerous. And I also said in the previous tape that, you know, that the feminism, that's a satanic revolutionary movement that was introduced to Eve, because that disrupted and totally destroyed the harmony within the garden. So yes, the man listened, he committed an infraction by listening, but Eve made that conscious choice by her own free will to do whatever it was that she did. So from that point forward, all the other wicked energetic forces of creation saw that if they want to cause disruption on the earth, they of course have to find weak men, but it's easier to work through the woman to cause certain facade or corruption on the planet. And, you know, when I look in the so-called black community, that's basically a lot of what I see. I could be wrong, but that's what I see. Next thing I want to transition into is this. So a lot of these woke movements, as I said, these people are exalting their own egos, and they see themselves as the Most High, just like how the Pharaoh did in the Old Testament, when he declared himself that he was the Lord God and that his laws and his statutes and commandments are the highest of the land. And this is what got him in trouble. But you got a lot of people out here today that have money and some that may not have money, and they have that same thought process. All right. Now, briefly, I want to look into the Nation of Islam and the quote unquote Moorish Science Temple, because even if both of these groups may have had a good intention in the beginning, I think both of these groups was infiltrated by satanic Luciferians. I think these certain satanic ideologies were taught to people in these groups, and I think it spreaded. And through that spread, it corrupted these groups to where today they really are a joke. And a lot of what they probably were intended to do, they're not really achieving their objective. Now, let me say this. When the Nation of Islam first started out, and when the Moorish Science Temple first started out, prior to it being infiltrated and destroyed, there was a lot of good work done. You got to remember, in the early 1900s, so-called black people, you know, a lot of us were very, very lost on who we were. So I would never be be disingenuous and say that these brothers such as Drew Ali, Elijah Muhammad, whoever else may have been involved in them, that they didn't do a lot of good work in trying to raise the consciousness and help, you know, the people in the community get back into their higher self, because they did. You know, these men at first were just some regular men, but I think that they were, you know, at some point came into contact with these certain satanic masons, and they may have not known that these people were involved in that. And through certain business dealings and stuff like that, I think they got caught up into something that they couldn't necessarily get out of. All right. I really, really do. And I think it was all of them. I think it was Noble Drew Ali, you know, Elijah Muhammad, all of them. All right. So when I look at a lot of the Nation of Islam, and when I look at a lot of the quote unquote Moorish Science Temple, what I see is Islamic and Hebraic heresy. Let me repeat that one more time. When I look at a lot of what the quote unquote Nation of Islam and the Moorish Science Temple got going on, it's a lot of Islamic and Hebraic heresy. Now, when I say heresy, what I mean is that it's not in its orthodox original form, meaning that it has certain Babylonian magical principles that have been included in it. And we're going to go over an example of it right here. So we all know through research that the man who taught Elijah Muhammad, which is named quote unquote Fard Muhammad, there's a lot of, skepticism behind who he is. But we do know that Fard Muhammad learned from Drew Ali. And prior to Fard Muhammad and Elijah Muhammad starting the Nation of Islam, these men were learning from Drew Ali. So the Moorish Science Temple is one of the early organizations. And it would make sense because when you look at the Moorish Science Temple, it's all inclusive. It's a divine national movement. So not only was the Hebraic Islamic culture reintroduced by Noble Drew Ali and the men he was working with and women, but also they reintroduced the nationality of the so-called black person as well. And they were very, very on point with what they came with, because they were telling the people we were indigenous to the Americas and a lot of the other information that we know. So Drew Ali, or the man that we call Noble Drew Ali, for some reason, he's not given a lot of the credit, but he was the teacher of Elijah Muhammad and Fard Muhammad from some of the information that I saw. Now, was Drew Ali part of any Freemasonic order, Prince Hall order? More than likely he was, more than likely he was. But that doesn't necessarily mean it may have been evil or bad or infiltrated, So I don't want to just say because somebody was a Freemason or somebody was a Shriner that made them a bad person, because some of that information or some of those groups in the late 1800s, early 1900s, especially the so-called black men that had started those groups post the Civil War, prior to World War I, they were trying to reorganize and restructure themselves. So I think they may have had good intentions at first, but, they were infiltrated by these certain Sabbatean Luciferians that were so-called black. So, all of them were infiltrated. So, as we said, Fard Muhammad and Elijah Muhammad were taught Sufism by Drew Ali. So the branch of Islam, ultimately, that is the highest branch of Islam, is Sufism. It is the contemplation and reaching the reality of the souls through meditation. That is the highest level of Islam. That is the highest level of Hebraica. That is what the rabbis was doing. That is what the prophets were doing. That is what the sheikhs and the imams and the beys, that's what they were doing. All the men of, the most high power, this is what they had the access to do. They had the access to, through the soul, to reach these various realities. And when you read through the Quran and you read through the scripture, all those stories, if you see those men interacting with the Most High and all them other, certain spiritual abilities and things that they had, it was through this understanding of this inner reality of the soul. So we talk about Islam or Sufism or the original Hebraic culture. This is ultimately what it is. All right. This has nothing to do with wokeism or any of that. This is what Jacob Ladders is all about. And this is what the Isra Mirage of the Prophet Muhammad is all about. All right. Jacob was not going up a physical ladder, walking up a physical ladder, just like the Prophet Muhammad did not physically go anywhere when he had his Isra Mirage. OK. So the base culture, I think, that was supposed to be Islamic was the Sufic culture. But as I said, these satanic people infiltrated the Moorish Science Temple and the Nation of Islam, and they got rid of the original Sufism and they perverted it and added that Kabbalah, satanic, black magic, Babylonian ideology into it. So when you look in the Nation of Islam and you look in the Moorish Science Temple, you see certain Babylonian concepts in it mixed in with the original Islamic Sufism. All right. So as they say, the devil will take the truth and then mix in falsehood with it. And that is what that's what was done. Also, too, one of these concepts of reincarnation, exhaustion of the ego, and saying that I am the prophet or I am the Messiah. You know, I think Drew Ali had a little bit of that going on. Fard Muhammad had that going on. And Elijah Muhammad had that going on. They was either calling themselves the messenger of God, the prophet of God, or something of that nature. Now, you know, now personally, I don't necessarily subscribe to calling Noble Drew Ali a prophet. I would say that he was a very learned man. He was an educated man, and he put in a lot of work to resurrect the empire here in America. So I would never discount that from him. But why do we have to call somebody a prophet? You know, when I think of a prophet, I think of typically, you know, those biblical characters or the Quranic characters. None of these so-called black men, you know, honestly, this is why I don't really look at them like that, because if they were those, if they're going to put themselves in the same seat as an Elijah, like this is why I don't call them that. If Noble Drew Ali, Elijah Muhammad, and Fard Muhammad are going to put themselves in the same seat as the prophet Yahushua, as the prophet Moses, as the prophet Elijah, as the prophet Abraham, as the prophet Jeremiah, if they're going to put themselves analogous to those men, now, even if those biblical characters are just mythologies, it still may be a symbol for something that's real. So I guess the information that they brought is what we want to stick more to, because if you look at the state of so-called black people today, it doesn't look like any of that work was done. Just like how the prophet Yahushua, when he came and tried to, you know, preach to the people in Jerusalem, after they did what they did with him and tried to kick him up out of town, it wasn't like all the people just changed and got into their higher self. But you just got to be careful when you want to say, you know, that a man is the Messiah or a prophet, or you just got to be careful with that, because these people have been abusing that stuff. And this is how they have been getting control over the minds of the people. For example, we all know about the brother Malcolm X, peace be upon him, and Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X had a little feud going on, you know, so Malcolm had a problem with the Nation of Islam. But ultimately, when Malcolm found out about Elijah Muhammad, who I think was in his elder years when he committed some of these acts that he may have done, but when Malcolm found out that Elijah Muhammad was sleeping with some of the other young women in the nation and getting these women pregnant and then casting these women out or banishing these women from the nation, you know, Malcolm was concerned with this. So he approached Elijah Muhammad and asked him about it. And out of Malcolm's own mouth, you can research this, out of Malcolm's own mouth, he said that Elijah Muhammad told him that he was the modern day David or Solomon, and he was fulfilling prophecy with what he was doing. Now, I don't know what the brother Malcolm may have been thinking in his head when he told him that, but I can probably assure you that he probably was thinking that this is all a bunch of BS. When Elijah looked at Malcolm in his eyes and told him that, Malcolm probably was thinking in his head, this is some BS. And these niggas have lost their minds, and this shit ain't really what I thought it was. But he was surrounded by so many Freemasons and so many people in certain groups, and maybe even Malcolm had gotten tricked into the Freemasonry, that it was kind of too late, you know. So, and once again, I find it also interesting that Elijah Muhammad would tell him that he is Solomon, the modern day Solomon, because his activity was just like Solomon's. By Elijah Muhammad doing what he did with those young women in the way he did it, it caused a disturbance and it caused a divide in the Nation of Islam. The same way that when Solomon committed the acts that he did with his strange wives, it eventually caused a division in the Nation of Israel between the North and the South. So I don't know if that was a Freudian slip when he said that, but Elijah Muhammad was right when he said that he was a modern day Solomon, because the same thing that Solomon did is the same thing that Elijah Muhammad did. In the same way it caused a division in the Nation of Israel is the same way it caused a division in the Nation of Islam. But when you look at Solomon and Elijah Muhammad, both of them committed these acts in their elder or older years, when the mind is much weaker and the waswas or the whispers of the shaitan are stronger to influence. So that's what it is. The whispers of the shaitan, it'll tell these men that you are God, you are the prophet, you are illuminated, you are conscious. That's why you got to be careful when you meditate or you go into a state of contemplation to get these satanic whispers out of your mind, because a lot of those satanic whispers are going to be telling you, man, you going into your third eye, man, you in your higher self, Man, your kundalini awakening. Man, your chakras are open. Man, you can see it all. Man, you divine and spiritual. Man, you in the reality of the souls. The ego or the Satan, it will tell you that. So, you know, it's going to take a lot of practice for you to extract that, you know, negativity out of you and get it away from you so you can get the reality of the soul and get the truth behind it. All right. So before we move forward, what I want to, you know, conclude this part with is that Drew Ali, or Noble Drew Ali, through the Moorish Science Temple, and it originally was, I think, Allah's Temple of Islam, if I'm not mistaken, but it wasn't originally the Moorish Science Temple. I think it may have been Allah's Temple of Islam, something like that. But Fard Muhammad and Elijah Muhammad learned from Drew Ali, so the Nation of Islam had its start in the Moorish Science Temple, or a Islamic Sufi ideology. All right. And that is Moorish. You know, that's a Hebrew real thing. So it started out good, but then it went left because the Nation of Islam, they don't deal with traditional Orthodox Islam. You know, they have their own alternative practices to where a lot of the, you know, Muslims in the Far East, they don't really even acknowledge the Nation of Islam as a true Muslim group. All right. The next thing I want to talk about, in a previous tape, you know, I was trying to tell us about the Wahhabist movement, you know, but I was kind of having a hard time saying the word because it's a little tricky word to say. But let's look a little deeper into the Wahhabism, because as I told y'all before, Sabbatai Zevi, who was a Jewish Kabbalist, was forced into Islam. So you had a lot of Jewish people who were acting like they were Islamic. They were dressing like they were Islamic, but they really behind the closed doors was practicing satanic Jewish culture. So let's read this real quick just to, you know, get a little background. So it says that Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was a descendant of a family of Donmei Jews from Turkey. So that term Wahhabi or Wahhab comes from a man named Abdul Wahhab, and he was born in the Donmei, born from a family of Donmei Jews in Turkey. Now that's very important because Sabbatai Zevi was born in Syria, Turkey. All right. And as you're going to see in a minute, the Donmei is the same group of people that he created. The Donmei were descendants of followers of the infamous false messiah of Judaism, Sabbatai Zevi, who was of Ashkenazi origin, who shocked the Jewish world in 1666 by converting to Islam. Viewing it as a sacred mystery, Zevi's followers imitated his conversion to Islam, though secretly keeping to their Kabbalistic doctrines. In Europe, the Sabbatians were led a century later by Jacob Frank, a follower of Zevi. According to Rabbi Antelman, and to eliminate the opiate, to them belonged the Rothschild, who had a hand in the founding of the Bavarian Illuminati. So I wanted to just talk about this so you'll see the connection between the Zionist Israelis and the House of Saud in modern day Saudi Arabia, or the Wahhabist House of Saud. So a lot of these Muslims today, Muslims, Muslims, are actually descendants of certain Jewish people from Turkey. Okay. So just keep that in mind. I just wanted to, you know, bring that point back up. And as we have right here, we just have a picture of men in the secret society behind closed doors. All right. So the next thing we want to talk about, and we're going to wrap it up, is this is something that I see going on in the so-called conscious community, but in the last year or two, I've been seeing it going on in the streets as well. So not only just people that are getting into this quote unquote knowledge of self and they're being deceived by this satanic Luciferian stuff, but a lot of these gangsters, gang members, and certain brothers into the streets, they're starting to get deceived by this satanic Luciferianism as well. Because a lot of these guys in the streets are practicing Ifa, or quote unquote African worship. They're practicing Ifa or some of these quote unquote African ancestral worship cultures. Now, what ultimately is this? These people think that by doing particular rituals or whatever the case may be, that they could come into contact with the soul of a deceased ancestor, and that this deceased ancestor would do their bidding in the spiritual world, and they will have certain physical results from that work. All right. As I said in a previous tape, I'm not here to really demonize or beat up anybody's personal religious beliefs or anything like that. But this is what I will tell you that I know. Anytime you go into the spiritual world or you deal with anything spiritual, but you want some type of a physical benefit or physical reward for it, and that's the true intention of why you're going into this spiritual realm, when you think that way, you're already aligning yourself up, not with the reality of the soul, but you are opening up the doorway for some type of a spiritual being out here that is in agreement with what it is you're trying to do. And you're not going to interface with that spiritual being. And through the whispers in your ear, through certain images that it gives you in your mind, it's going to influence you and it's going to bring what you want into existence. But you're going to have to give it something in return for doing that. So a lot of these people who are practicing Ifa and they think that they're doing ancestor worship, they really are dealing with certain jinn or certain spiritual entities that can shapeshift and take on the image or take on the appearance or the form of a known deceased ancestor. Yes. For all of us that are familiar with the video game Mortal Kombat, or even the recent movie Mortal Kombat that came out, there is a character in the movie and the video game named Shang Tsung. He is the lead evil character. All right. And one of the abilities of Shang Tsung is that he has the power to shapeshift or take on the image of a known person or an unknown person. An example of this in Mortal Kombat 1 that came out in the 90s was at the end of the movie. Liu Kang had a real deep, emotional relationship with his brother. And at the beginning of the movie, his brother was killed. And he went on this whole quest to find his brother's killers to seek his vengeance. And in the end, and when he was fighting Shang Tsung was losing the fight. So what Shang Tsung decided to do was he shapeshifted and he took on the image and the appearance of Liu Kang's cousin. And when he did this, Liu Kang was deceived for a brief moment, and the Shang Tsung in the image of his cousin started to work on his emotions, work on his heart. But as Shang Tsung was doing this, there was a pit of really spikes starting to raise up so he could try to push Liu Kang into it. But as he was working his wasp and his whispers into the ears of Liu Kang's soul woke up and said, no, wait a minute, you're not my brother. My brother's soul has moved on to another realm, and my brother's soul has went on his own journey. You're an imposter. And as soon as he did that, Shang Tsung switched back into his original evil self, and they started back fighting. So that is an example of Hollywood trying to show you that you may not believe it. And if it was physically happening in front of you, sometimes we may not even know it. But I can say this: through the human mind, through contemplation, through dreams, and through the non-physical and through the intangible, these certain wicked jinn and wicked satanic spiritual energies can shapeshift and make you think that you are dealing with a known ancestor. So now let me say this too. Can the higher power inspire you through dreams and contemplation? And you may have certain peaceful memories of loved ones or family members and friends that have passed on. Of course. And there's nothing wicked about that. But just understand that the soul of that real human being that you once knew and once loved on this planet, once that person dies and move on, that soul continues its journey. Life continues, y'all. It's not like, it's not like stuff ends for them. It continues, and they still have their own objective and own things that they're trying to achieve. So it's very, very arrogant and egotistical for a person that's still here on earth to think that a person that has died and moved on is still lingering around the earth atmosphere that wants to just answer prayers and wishes and hopes that we have, like some I Dream of Genie type stuff. That's very, very arrogant and egotistical. And most of us that think that way are only doing it because we want some type of physical result. Because everybody that I ever saw in the conscious community that made tapes, you know, even some of the people I rock with, for example, like my boy Bobby Hemmett. I like Bobby Hemmett. A lot of information he put out was on point. But I think the brother may have been even misled with some of the stuff that he had, that he thought, you know. So, you know what I'm saying? We just got to be careful on that, on making partners with the higher power. Because the reality of the soul can bring forth everything that you need here. So there's no point of doing a ritual or a sacrifice to some non-physical being to get something done. You don't need to go kill nobody. You don't need to go getting an orgy. You don't need to sign this contract. You don't need to sign this group. Like, you don't got to do all that. The higher power that really created creation, that really extracted your individual soul from the ocean of mercy. See, the God Almighty has an ocean of mercy that our souls were extracted out of. And God Almighty individually gave us our own personal reality, which is a blessing. So through that blessing already, you already hooked up with everything you need. You just need to go through that reality of the soul to get access to everything that you need, you know. So we don't have to like get into a lot of this black magic to get certain things that we want done. Because once you tap into that, you're opening up your door now to certain spiritual beings that deal with that. So, for example, those higher angels, those higher cherubim and seraphim that are around the throne of the higher power, that work on behalf of the higher power, they don't deal with that. You know? So just understand that when you dial on your spiritual cell phone using some type of black magic, only a satanic jinn gonna pick that up. No type of higher angel is gonna respond to that request because they don't deal in that, you know. So hopefully this tape was you know, y'all got some good information from that. But stay tuned for the next one. I just wanted to talk about, you know, these realities of the soul, images and forms, understanding the difference between the finite reality, you know, this physical world, understanding that there are a lot of false prophets and false messiahs out here. These are the students of the Dajjal, okay? And what they're doing is they're all preparing you and testing you because there's going to be a real false messiah. So if you were a person and you got deceived by Elijah Muhammad, you got deceived by Malcolm X, you got deceived by Tupac, you got deceived by Michael Jordan,